Hello and welcome to the fourth session introducing the IB Psychology course. In the previous session, you were introduced to assessment in the IB Psychology course. In this session, you will assess your recall of the assessment components, and you will also be introduced to the experimental method and to the internal assessment in the IB Psychology course. Please first answer the following two questions. First, which components does assessment in the IB Psychology course consist of? Second, what do you remember about them? Pause the video and continue watching when you complete the task. Assessment in the IB Psychology course consists of papers 1, 2 and 3 and internal assessment. Paper 1 lasts 2 hours and consists of 3 short answer questions and 1 essay on the biological, cognitive and social cultural approaches to understanding behavior. It is worth 50% of the grade for standard level students and 40% of the grade for the higher level students. For standard level students, paper 2 involves writing 1 essay on the options. It lasts 1 hour and is worth 25% of the grade. For higher level students, paper 2 involves writing 2 essays on 2 options. It lasts 2 hours and is worth 20% of the grade. Paper 3 is only for higher level students. It lasts 1 hour and involves analyzing a previously unseen study. It is worth 20% of the grade. Internal assessment is worth 25% of the grade for standard level students and 20% of the grade for higher level students. You are going to find out more details about internal assessment in this session. To introduce you to internal assessment in the IB Psychology course, please complete the following task. Imagine psychologists wanted to know whether length of words to be memorized influences how well people can recall these words. Answer the following two questions. First, how could psychologists conduct a study to investigate this question? Second, what would they need to do to be able to determine whether it is really the length of the words and not something else that influences participants' memory? Pause the video and continue watching when you complete the task. To investigate the proposed question, psychologists would need to decide on 2 or more different lengths of words to investigate. For example, words with 3 to 5 letters and words with 8 to 10 letters. They would also need to decide how to measure recall. For example, they could ask participants to memorize a list of 20 words, half shorter and half longer, and then count how many shorter and longer words each participant recalled correctly. To be able to determine whether it is really the length of words that influences memory of participants, they would also need to exclude other possible explanations. For example, psychologists would need to make sure that the shorter and longer words are equally familiar to participants. You have just seen an example of a psychological experiment. Experiments are conducted to determine whether one factor influences another. The factor which researchers manipulate or change is called independent variable, while the factor which they measure is called a dependent variable. In an experiment, each variable needs to be operationalized. This means it needs to be clearly defined so that it can be manipulated or measured. Finally, an important concept in experiments is control. Researchers need to eliminate or keep constant the effects of each variable other than the independent variable so that it does not affect the dependent variable. In your psychology internal assessment, you will work as a part of a group of 2 to 4 students to investigate a theory or model by conducting an experiment and reporting your findings in about 2000 words. The theory or model on which your investigation is based must appear in a peer-reviewed publication. The research method, participants and materials, as well as the operationalization of the independent and dependent variables, will be the result of the group working together. Once the data has been generated, the collaboration is complete. Each student will analyze data, draw conclusions, and write up the report independently of other group members. When it comes to the independent variable in the internal assessment, it is important that there is only one independent variable. It is highly recommended that the independent variable has only 2 conditions. Details of how the independent variable is operationalized may differ from the study which the experiment is based on. Variables that are based upon pre-existing characteristics of participants are not acceptable as an independent variable, for example age or handedness. When it comes to the dependent variable, it is highly recommended that there is only one dependent variable. Students may replicate the operationalization of the dependent variable used in the study on which they base their experiment, or they may adapt it to suit their own circumstances or resources. For example, students may alter the number of measurements taken, the type of measurements taken, or use a different dependent variable altogether, provided that the link between the theory or model and their own experiment remains clear and can be justified. Before we discuss ethical considerations regarding internal assessment, let's do a quick review task. What are some ethical considerations in psychology? Pause the video and continue watching when you answer the question. Ethical considerations in psychology include protection from harm, informed consent, anonymity or confidentiality, withdrawal, debriefing, and avoiding deception. All these ethical considerations also apply to the internal assessment. There are some additional ethical considerations regarding the internal assessment as well. Experiments involving placebos, ingestion, inhalation, or deprivation are not acceptable and will not earn marks. In addition, any experimental study that creates anxiety, stress, pain, or discomfort for participants is not permitted. Finally, experiments involving deception, conformity, obedience, or any other form of harm are not permitted. Furthermore, experiments involving unjustified deception, involuntary participation, or invasion of privacy, including the inappropriate use of information and communication technology, email, and the internet, must be avoided. Partial deception may be allowed for some experiments where full knowledge of the experiment would fundamentally affect the outcome. Such experiments are permissible provided they do no harm and participants are fully debriefed. In addition, children under 12 years must not be used as participants, while experiments involving children aged 12 to 15 need the written consent of parents or guardians. Finally, animals must not be used. In the last part of this session, let's have a look at the main sections of your IRA report, which consists of introduction, exploration, analysis, and evaluation, as well as references and appendices. In the introduction, you will need to write the aim of your experiment and the theory or model it is based on. You will also need to operationalize your independent and dependent variables and state your hypothesis. In the exploration section, you will write about your experimental design, participants, sampling technique, controlled variables, and materials you used. In the analysis section, you will calculate your results and present them graphically as well. You will discuss your results and write about strengths, limitations, and modifications to your study in the evaluation section. You will need to list the works you cited in your report in references and include the materials you used and your raw data tables in the appendices. We have reached the end of this session in which you were introduced to internal assessment in the IB Psychology course.